Hey, it's Monday night, guys. Welcome to Monday Night Live in Lexington, everyone. My name is Catherine Kaufman, and I'm a psychic medium here in Lexington, Kentucky. Thanks for joining me for my every Monday night show where we explore what and who we are through this journey called life. Welcome to everybody who's joining here on Facebook and Instagram over here. If you're on my professional page, Catherine Kaufman Psychic Medium, and you want to join the live chat, I did leave a link for you there. Just hit that link and come on over to the personal page where I'll be addressing the chat. Couple shout outs and then we'll get into some announcements. Hey to Taya Moore, Jay Ross, Melissa Begley, big kiss to you and Miss Cleo, Wendy, Samantha, and Zoe, and hey to all you guys over here on Instagram. So events that are coming up, I'm so excited, you guys, because September and October, you know, is our favorite months. Just to let you know, the backdrop is going to change from the summer lightning bugs or fairies to the fall. So next Monday is going to be, I'm going to pick out a really special fall backdrop to get us started into fall. So that's going to be exciting. Also announcing, I will be at Scarefest this year. Okay, I'm partnering with Horror 2005 movie props, and we're going to have a booth with Chucky dolls and things from those kind of movies at the booth. You have to come by, get your picture taken with Chucky. It's going to be a lot of fun. I won't be doing readings, but I will be giving many lessons on how to use a pendulum. So if you've always wondered about how to use a pendulum correctly, or you wanted to get into that, come by and see me at the booth, and I will give you a little individualized session or lesson on that, okay? So that's Scarefest. It's downtown Lexington. I think it's the weekend of the 13th, 14th, and 15th. And again, I'm partnering with Horror 2005 movie props. It's going to be a ton of fun. For those of you guys that are joining me, thank you, Melissa. Big kisses to you. Do go into Scarefest and take a look at some of the people that are going to be appearing at Scarefest, and consider coming down and saying hi to me at the booth. Also, this October, okay, and I only have maybe 4 or 5 days left that I can book in October for the weekends for events. You'll be able to get an appointment with me during October, but if you're wanting to book an event for October, there's only 2 or 3 days left that aren't booked up for me for October. So if you were thinking about hiring me for an event, you better hurry, because there's only a few days left. I am going to do the library event, the Lexington Public Library event again this year. This time I think it's going to be downtown at the courthouse. And then I'm also doing a special event at the library in Bowling Green this year. So I'm really excited about that, and about seeing and meeting everybody in Bowling Green. Also working on the editing for the Mount Horeb Earthworks, or the Mound Walk that we did this summer. That will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, so be looking for that if you want to know more about Thunderbolt Strike Mounds in Kentucky. And then I want to give a big shout out to my friends at Wicked World Scaregrounds. It's out Tates Creek Road. It's a 3 conglomerate plex of haunted houses. So when you go out there, you have 3 different attractions that you can go to. You can go to, I think it's, they may have changed it this year, because they try to change it a little bit of something every single year. But last year it was Mercy Hospital, Quarantine, and Dark Carnival. And I absolutely love going through that. It's the best haunted house in Kentucky, just my opinion, but it's such a good time, and you guys really ought to consider going out and going through the haunt. So Kimberly wants to know, are you coming to the Harlan Haunt Fest? Everything got booked up, Kimberly, before I got a chance to put that on the calendar. So you'll have to contact the people there and see if, you know, they still want that, or, you know, I don't know, like everything just got booked up all of a sudden. And so I'm doubting that I'll get to go to Harlan this year, but that's kind of sad. So anyway, let's get into our topic tonight, because this is a huge topic and it's growing. Victorian mourning jewelry. Is it making a comeback? Because I'm really seeing a lot of people with, you know, jewelry that's made with the hair. Thank you, Kimberly. Hey to Sharon, Jacob Norris, and Angela Atkins and Willow Rose Ames. Thanks for joining us this evening. Nice to see you guys. And Samantha Taylor, Melissa Arthur Woosley. And you guys, if you have a question about any of this material, please feel free to put it in the comment section. I promise you I will go back and I will try to get to it as soon as I can. Shout out to Joey, Deb, and Janice over here on Instagram. Thanks for joining us this evening. So who all knows what Victorian mourning jewelry is, or just plain old mourning jewelry? Because as I started getting involved in this topic, I started seeing that it goes beyond the Victorian era, okay? The Victorian era took it to a popularity in the 1800s, but the beginning of mourning jewelry and mourning customs was really around 1600. And so the reason why people started making memorial jewelry and hair jewelry was because there was no photography in those days. And if your loved one died, you wanted something as a touchstone to remember them on a daily basis. So, you know, if you were wealthy, you could get a painting done of your loved one. And later on, after, well, this was probably mid-1800s to 1900, there was a fad in death photography, which we'll go over in another show. And I just want to circle that to remind me to present that in a future show, because death photography was so interesting. But before that came out, there wasn't a lot of ways to memorialize someone without that photograph. And if you didn't have enough money, you couldn't get a painting. So these items and these things were developed to help people grieve and to help people memorialize their loved ones. So these items were not limited to women. Men could have, like, memorial cufflinks, pocket watch fobs were really popular with men. And that's where parts of the deceased person's hair was braided into the watch fob chain. And so they did have a lot of pictures of those on the internet, and I was really fascinated to see those. Now, as far as materials go for jewelry, black enamel was the hallmark of most mourning pieces, or jet. And jet is petrified wood, and it's black, and it was used at the beginning of the mourning period because of the dull nature of the jet. Now, later on, as you move through the grieving process, you could go on to more shiny things, but in the first part of the mourning process, it was really relegated to dull black colors. So, and this was interesting too, if a person was wearing white enamel, because certain colors meant certain things. So if a person was wearing white enamel, that meant that the deceased was a woman, unmarried, and a virgin. So purity was kind of conveyed in that white enamel color. Pearls were often worn to indicate the loss of a child. And we're going to go through some samples of descriptions of some pieces of jewelry. And so there'll be kind of a quiz on what do you think this piece of jewelry was representing. Hayden Nicole and Catherine Leslie Faye and Shelly and Kay Hedge over here on Instagram. Thanks for joining us this evening. Okay, so different colors represented different stages of grief. And I actually was lucky enough to pull up a chart on the stages of grieving, or the proper social presentation of grieving. And that's right here. And I'm going to kind of run through this really quickly. But this was the way you presented yourself during the grieving process. And some of the lengths of how long you were supposed to grieve really kind of surprised me, because like I always thought that the grief for a husband was as long as the grief for a wife, but not in those days. No, that's not true. So stay tuned to find out how long that was supposed to be. Tony says, love the background. Thank you, but it's leaving next week because we're going to do some fall backgrounds next week. Don't forget. Okay, so this became popular because of Queen Victoria in the 1800s, late 1800s, because in public, her profound sadness over the loss of her husband, Prince Albert, kind of popularized the tradition. And she actually wore her husband's mourning ring for the rest of her life, which was really sweet, I thought. So if you were following the strict Victorian mourning procedure, that was the only type of jewelry that was allowed for the first 2 or 3 years after the person had passed on, which was really cool. Now, so let's go over this chart because it was so interesting. Oh, yes, Catherine, I will definitely go back to the internet and find this link and send it to you. But so there's periods of mourning. There's first mourning when you only wear black wool. Now, can you imagine wearing that in the summer? Of course, they probably had light derivations of wool for summer, but still. The second period of mourning was silk, and then they had periods of ordinary mourning and half mourning. So let's look at parents. So if you had a parent that died, the mourning period was a collective of 6 months. Now, 3 of those months were spent in wool with white accessories. Then we go to the ordinary mourning period. The 3 months in wool was considered the first and second period of mourning. And then after the 3 months was up, you went to 6 weeks of black silk and trimmings fringed linen in a lighter color. And then after that 6 weeks was up, you went to another 6 weeks, and this was half mourning, of black and white clothing with diamonds. Then you were allowed to progress to diamonds. Grandparents, the mourning period was 4 months. Now this surprised me. A brother or sister was 6 weeks and 1 day. Is that not weird? 6 weeks and 1 day. I don't know about you guys, but I would have to mourn way longer for a brother and a sister than 6 weeks. An aunt or an uncle were 3 weeks in a day, and they break it up into how many weeks with the wool, how many weeks with the silk, how many days with fringed linen, how many days with black or white blonde trimmings. Crazy. So I think, Catherine, what I'll do instead of trying to find the website is I'll snap a shot of this and I'll message it to you so you can look at it. Okay, so here's something weird. A first cousin is only 8 days. A second cousin is 8 days of mourning. Now, here's where I got confused, because for a husband, you were supposed to mourn 1 year and 6 weeks. So that was 6 months in wool, trained robe with white trimmings and bronzed bucklets. 6 months in black silk with a white cape, trimmings, and black stones. And when you went to half mourning, you went 6 weeks in black and white, 2 accessories, all black or all white. Hey, Hidenori and Danielle, thanks for joining me. Now, this is where I was just like shocked, because for a wife, you're only supposed to mourn for 6 months. Now, why is that different for a husband and wife? So for a wife, it was a black wool suit and black wool stockings for 6 weeks. First 3 with deep weepers on cuffs. I have no idea what that is. And then when you went to second mourning, it was a black suit with silk stocking and fringed linens. And then when you went to half mourning, it was 6 weeks in black suit with silver buckles and a sword. That is so interesting. So the mourning for the wife is half as long as the mourning for the husband. But I think that that has to do with the fact that in those days, you know, lots of children passed away when they were young, and it was real important for families to perpetuate their lineage. And so it was very common for a man to marry sooner after the passing of the wife than for the wife to marry after the passing of a husband. And that's just how, you know, sociologically we've changed over the years. Because now I think it's just as important for you to mourn equally the passage of your partner, should they be male or female. And then also I'm seeing a big uprise of mourning jewelry coming back, particularly the black enamel jewelry and some of the jet jewelry. Now, women who entered stages of mourning in its fashion were held to the stage of convention far more strictly than men. And we kind of see that in the mourning period for a husband rather than the mourning period for a wife. And Angela has a question or a comment. Maybe the wife would have to mourn a husband just in case she was pregnant at the time of his death. Now, that's true, Angela, and I hadn't thought about that, but that's very pertinent. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that that could have been a big thing. We have to wait and see if there's some kind of progeny from that marriage. And also, when they were making the Victorian mourning jewelry, they felt like the gem possessed some kind of magical property that increased the love for the deceased. It also represents rebirth, piety, friendship. So this all carried through the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. And a lot of the gems represented certain things, like in the beginning of the show, I mentioned that pearls represented the loss of a child, and the white enameled jewelry represented the loss of a young female, particularly who was unmarried or a virgin. So I'm just checking for questions over here on Instagram. If you guys have any questions, just holler out. I'll try to get to them. Hey to Joey, Debbie, Janice, Shelly, and Kay Hedge. Okay, so let's continue on. With that in mind, the half stage of mourning, and that was when you were half through your process, is one stage where they were the diamonds were particularly permissible at that time. And this was around 1765, 1800. We also get into hair mourning jewelry, which I am really, really into, because when I was an ICU nurse, it always just really, really pained me to see those families leave after somebody passed on and they had nothing. Like, they left without that loved one. They left without anything. It was a very empty feeling. So in a lot of the cases, what I would do was to clip a little hair lock from the back where it wouldn't be noticeable and give it to the families that were leaving. And so they seemed to all appreciate that. But into hair work, it was twisted. Hair was twisted, frizzled to make crosses or flowers. And these were all displayed under a glass case. And they also chopped the hair into little pieces, and they used the hair in this way to create texture in paintings. So hair art was huge in 1760s, 1800, and 1860s. And it was actually created into a type of art form. And with that, it grew commercially. It got really big. And so what happened, the reason why it fell into, you know, a situation where people didn't want it anymore, was because a lot of places were professing mail order, like mail your husband's hair to us and we will make something out of it and send it back. And so what was happening is a lot of people were doing that, but they weren't getting their loved one's hair back. It was someone else's hair or horse hair. How they found that out, I'm not sure. But after that, it, you know, it fell by the wayside, and it wasn't done as much, and it just kind of, you know, fizzled out from there. So but now there are art places and jewelers that are bringing this art form back, and some of the pieces that they're creating are absolutely unbelievable. And it, you know, this was a comforting memento for a lot of people that missed their loved ones, and wanted, like we said, a touchstone, something with that person's energy, something from that person that they could use and wear every single day. So creating hair jewelry out of this art, it sort of was a feminized way of bonding and grieving. And I say feminized because in that time, the women were trying to find out about how to do the hair art themselves, because they didn't trust the mail order places to not send that same loved one's hair back to them. So there were a lot of places, let me find it online, magazine tutorials and pamphlets that gave step-by-step instructions on how to weave the hair together, how to bond the hair, how to preserve the hair, what things they could make out of the hair. And these were like magazine tutorials about how to make the hair jewelry and art. So women kind of worked from these instructions frequently in groups or families or friends together. And so what it did was it created a huge bonding experience. And the creation of these items often brought a structure to the mourning process. And so I thought that was just so lovely. So today we would probably describe this as a grieving process, or a way to accept the death and kind of honor it. So that was so cool. So it's a huge art form. It's a big comforting memento. And it really bonded people together. So nowadays, I feel like everyone could kind of participate in this. You know, no matter what your sociological background, this is something that everyone could participate in. And also, it seemed to be a tangible record of births and deaths and progress within the family and friends of love and grief. So a lot of times they would do, like, it's almost like a family tree out of the hair, but it represented all the different people, the dates of their birth and death, and the hair mementos were on these things that they were creating. And just think of the familial energy of a piece like that. So part of the reason for this booming popularity during this time, and mourning clothing forms are a large part of the modern ideas of Victorians due to two factors. So we have the factor of the Civil War and Queen Victoria. So a lot of people emulated Queen Victoria, and they wanted to follow the mourning procedures just because she was doing it for Prince Albert. But then we have the Civil War that happened, and we have millions of people bereaved in America mourning over some of the people that they lost in the Civil War. And it wasn't just soldiers that were lost in the Civil War. A lot of civilians were lost in the Civil War as well. So a lot of the mourning jewelry had to do with those folks as well. So we're going to take a peek at, let's mention this. Hair does not decay if properly preserved and taken care of. So that's one of the reasons why it was the perfect thing to use in the mourning jewelry. If cared for properly, it doesn't decay and it remains as stable as it was on the day of death. It's kind of like bone almost. The most common hair jewelry then were lockets and brooches. And lockets are ideal for keeping a tiny snip of the hair in, and they date back to the original days of hair memorials in the 16th century. So the beginning of all the hair stuff was 16th century. Brooches were very common in the Victorian period, and it was easy to arrange a braid or carefully decorated lock of hair under glass. So pictures with the person's name and date of death and their hair was placed under glass. And so that was really cool. So when you looked in your magazine, if you were a lady that lived in this era, if you looked in your magazine and it was giving instructions on how to treat the hair, homemade mixtures to stiffen it, how to create rings, bracelets, necklaces, even hair bows were made out of the hair. And they were all intricately woven, and they had patterns in the magazines that you could follow. So you could wear a hair bow of someone else's that was your loved one next to you. So hair art was also a popular motif for inside the home, and the most common were hair wreaths. So they would have a hair wreath. Now, some of these were under glass, some of them were not. And Samantha says there's a beautiful example at the Helen Keller house. Samantha, was it a picture that was under glass with the hair, or what did they have on display there at Helen Keller house? And was it hair of Helen Keller? That's my question. Hey to Tim Rogers, Tanya, Sharon, and Chastity. Thanks for joining us. Let me check for any questions. No questions yet. I know this is a lot of material. Hey to Flat Pretty over here on Instagram. And I'm trying to get through it because there's like a lot here. I may go a little bit over on tonight's show because there's so much here, but there's not enough to do a second series. So anyway, let's move on. I want to give you some examples. Okay, next is we're going to examples of some of the mourning jewelry. So this first one is a ring that I'm going to present to you, and it's made with emerald pasties. Now, a paste was, it was supposed to look like a precious stone, but it wasn't, because a lot of people did not have the money to buy precious gemstones or diamonds. And so this was an emerald paste, and it was surrounded by an oval bezel with plaited hair. Seed pearls alternated with the paste, making the ring highly decorated and perfectly sentimental. So remember at the first of the show, we said that pearls represented the passage of a child. So this obviously was made for a mother representing her child. The hair was plaited and set in the middle with the seed pearls and the emerald pastes around it. Now, paste in particular was necessarily to emulate these precious gemstones. And what paste was actually leaded glass that's cut and polished with a metal powder, emulating the facets of the cut gem. And paste was kind of popularized in the 1700s. And they were actually designed to copy the cut of a diamond in the same manner. And so paste back then was known as white diamante or strass. And so some of these were backed with colored foil that could replicate a ruby, an emerald, or a sapphire. So this particular ring that I was looking at that I described to you was an emerald paste with the seed pearls with the plaited hair in the middle. So beautiful. And that represented the death or passage of a child. Okay, so let's get on to some other samples or examples. Hey to Terry Pfister over here on Instagram and Lacey Bug. Thanks for joining me. So often, though, the mourning jewelry was in the first phase, remember, was all black and it was muted black. So you were supposed to wear jet or an enameled ring. So this next ring was an example of an enameled ring. It had the inscription inside which says, Joseph Watson died 14th February 1849, age 80. So a lot of the mourning jewelry had the inscriptions on it. Here's an example of a mourning locket. And once photography was introduced to the public, the combination of lockets, the hair, and the picture was all combined together. So what I saw was an enamel locket on a banded agate bracelet. So the locket was on the bracelet. And this was created sometime around 1900. The locket featured lilies of the valley that were engraved on it, which was a common flower used in mourning jewelry. And they symbolized the tears of the Virgin Mary, which was very sweet. The locket was blue, which represented a different stage of the mourning process where they went from black to blue. And so that piece of jewelry was created for one of the final stages of mourning when the darker colors were left behind. So that was a mourning locket for a child. So that was really cool. In 1850, diamonds were big in the mourning jewelry, and some of them had a coil of hair under the actual diamond crystal, and the hair inside the ring was from the deceased and would often be referred to as a collar. So the reason it was referred to as a collar is the diamond was set in the middle, in the center, and the hair was wound around it at the bottom. And so it was like a collar that was encompassing the gemstone. And so this ring that I was looking at, this diamond ring with the collar of the hair, it had inscribed on it weeping willows and urns, and those are common images that were used on mourning jewelry. And the ring had hand-painted scenes with the willows and the urns, and it also had inscripted a message, not lost, but gone before. Beautiful. I just love it. And the intricacy of these, microscopic paintings on this small jewelry was just absolutely phenomenal. Okay, so let's go on to another sample or two, and then I'll call it for the evening. But so 1760 to 1810, the first deepest stage of mourning, and that's when you expect the black wool and the black colors, non-reflective surfaces around the house and the body. That made it perfect for jet jewelry, because remember, jet is, unless it's really polished, it is a dull, non-reflective type of, it's not exactly a gemstone, it's petrified wood, but unless it's highly polished, it's not really reflective. And so jet was used highly in the 19th century, and then precious jewels weren't as widely as accepted until later on. But yes, diamonds were used for the second stage of the mourning. So let me look at one more urn thing. Another example was an urn, weeping willows. Again, it was the Georgian era ring. However, the leaves and the branches of the weeping willows were made from tiny pieces of hair. So this was an example of where they chopped the hair up into tiny little pieces that were perfect to emulate the branches of the weeping willow and the painting on this. And that was a brooch, a ring. I'm sorry, that one was a ring. So can you imagine how tiny you would have to have, you know, like a loop just to see what you were painting on that? Now, I'm going to leave you with this last piece of jewelry that I saw, and it was absolutely crazy. It was so crazy. This was a super fancy piece of memorial jewelry. It has a band, and the band was saying, "Drop the tear of sensibility on the grave of virtue." And that was a testament to the virtue of the lost loved one. And that person died at the age of 27. But then there was what was called a memento mori skeletal band. And this ring was dated 1727, and it features a full skeleton wrapped around the entire ring. And it was macabre to look at it. They had a crown above the skeleton's skull representing that death is the master of all. Below the feet, or below the figure's feet, is a tablet with the words memento mori, edged by symbols of the passion. The bezel of the ring is in the shape of a gold coffin. And if you look through the stone, you can see an additional skeleton inside the coffin. That's two skeletons on one ring. Hey, Ernesto, Sandy, and Lauren, and Larry, and Teresa, and Nicole, and Paul. Thanks for joining me. So this was all just fascinating. I really feel like Mourning Jewelry is going to make a comeback. And I hope it does, because, you know, just kind of reflecting back to, you know, when my parents passed away, had I known a lot about this, I probably would have commissioned something to wear as a memento from them. And I do have some of my mother's hair where I used to do her haircuts. She had Alzheimer's. I used to do her haircuts before she passed away. And I saved the hair, but I didn't know what I was saving it for. So I'm thinking, yeah, maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe if I get, you know, productive enough, I'll do something with it. Anyway, you guys, thanks for joining me tonight. Next week, we're going to go into apports. And what is an apport, how it happens, why it happens. I hope you join me for that. You guys stay safe this week. Have a great week. Kisses from Kentucky. And I will see you next Monday. Don't forget, this Friday, I have a free reading on Facebook. It's called Fun Friday. You get to pick between 3 cards, and you get the inspirational reading that goes with it for free every day on Facebook and Instagram. I do daily planetary influences where you get kind of a mini snapshot of the astrological influence for the day. It's very, very helpful. And I hope you guys join me next week for apports. Bye, guys. Have a fun week.